A few days ago, one of my viewers named Nosensitus asked me, "Hey Ninjax, can you make a guide on Solo Silencer versus Faceless Void and Doombringer?" While it is a good question, I feel that a guide just on that specific matchup would be too narrow to apply to other situations. If I did make a guide on Silencer versus Void and Doom, what if in the next game he had trouble as Dragon Knight versus Windrunner? So instead of focusing on just one specific scenario, the more important thing is to develop the ability to figure out how to play any lane matchup during a game. That's why I'm presenting a simple guide to handling your lane. But before we move on to the question of how to play versus each hero matchup, the first question you should ask is which lane should I go to? Most of us know that the safe lane for Radiant is bottom, and for Dire it is top. The reason it is considered safe is because you can pull creep camps to deny enemies experience, and by pulling creeps closer to your tower, the enemies will have a harder time retreating. The middle lane is generally safe because the towers are close by. You also have access to both ruin spots and can move to the side lanes easily. As a result, a lot of gankers like to play middle. The only lane left is the suicide lane. It's called the suicide lane for a reason. 1. You're far away from your tower, so retreating is difficult. 2. Enemies can wrap around you through the jungle. And 3. The enemies can pull their creep camps to deny you experience. Going back to my viewer's question, when I watched his replay, he was solo silencer in the suicide lane against Void and Doombringer. He had a very tough time as Void would time walk in, and Doombringer would assist by nuking him down. A silencer without disables or an escape mechanism, there's very little you can do about it. Looking at a lot of the popular choices for the suicide lane, like Windrunner, Mirana, or Darkseer, they all have escape mechanisms to protect themselves from these situations. So the short answer to my viewer's question is that perhaps they shouldn't have went to the suicide lane in the first place. The safe lane or the middle lane would have been a better choice for the flimsy silencer. Now I do understand that in pub games, you don't always get the lane that you want. Sometimes you get shafted to a crappy situation. So I'm going to move on to the core focus of this video. I want to break down the logic of handling your lane into 3 simple questions. By asking yourself these 3 questions when you arrive in your lane, you will be able to figure out how to handle it. So instead of me making a guide on every possible lane combination, by the end of this video, you'll be able to come up with your own strategy during an actual game. Let's focus on the first 2 questions. The first question you need to ask yourself is, how can they hurt me? The second question is, how can I avoid that? Survival is one of the most important things in Dota. By being able to answer those 2 questions is going to help you stay alive. Your ability to answer those 2 questions will come down a lot to game experience. Let me illustrate with 2 examples. The first example is going to be in the perspective of Vengeful Spirit. She's going to be laning with Faceless Void. Their enemies are Crystal Maiden and Juggernaut. So the first question is, how can they hurt me? It's very simple. If Crystal Maiden disables me and Juggernaut moves in with Blade Fury, I'm gonna get seriously hurt. Going to the second question, how can I avoid that? While Faceless Void can time walk away to safety, Vengeful Spirit cannot disable a magic immune Juggernaut. The only answer is to be in a safe position to avoid Crystal Maiden's disables. I have to stay behind Faceless Void at all times because if I move up, I risk getting disabled by Crystal Maiden. Through experience, you will find that the most common way to avoid getting hurt is just by being in a better position. So by answering the second question, you will be able to figure out which position you need to be in order to avoid getting hurt. The second example is focused on Anti-Mage with a Treant Protector who's playing really passively. Their enemies are Mirana and Windrunner. Again, Anti-Mage should be asking, how can they hurt me? In this situation, he's potentially in a lot of danger. If Shackle Shot hits, followed by Mirana's arrow, a power shot into Starfall is a lot of burst damage. Not only that, simple right clicks from 2 ranged heroes can be enough to hurt you. If so, how can I avoid that? Luckily, Anti-Mage has Blink, so we can use it to dodge Mirana's arrow, or even Shackle Shot if he reacts fast enough. To deal with the range harassment, rushing Ring of Health will help him negate the right-click damage. So aside from good positioning, some good answers to the second question is learning how to utilize your skills to the fullest, or picking up a key item early game to keep yourself alive. Once you have those two important questions figured out, then you can ask the last question: how can I hurt them? The answer to this question is going to help you gain control of your lane. At the end of the day, you can't dominate a lane by sitting back and playing passively. However, I do want to be clear, in some situations, you simply can't be aggressive or you will die. That's why I focus on the first two questions first. As long as you have good answers to stay alive, then you can focus on figuring out how to be aggressive and shutting your opponents down. I'm going to end this video with two more examples to illustrate the importance of the last question. The first example is me playing Clockwork versus Doombringer in the middle lane. Number 1. How can he hurt me? The reality is he can't do much. All he has is level death, which isn't enough to burst me down. My only danger from Doombringer is if he reaches level 6 and nukes me down with Doom and a well-timed level death for his bonus damage. Number 2. How can I avoid that? That's simple. Make sure I have plenty of HP by the time he hits level 6, and before that, I'm fine. My answers to the first two questions tells me that I'm really safe in this lane. With that in mind, I can focus on the last question: how can I hurt him? Since Doom is a melee hero, if he ever steps up too close to my side, I can punish him by charging forward with Battery Assault. So in this lane, I make sure to max that skill first, and I kept my eyes open for an opportunity to make that move. Sure enough, one simple mistake was all I needed. He stepped out of position, and I immediately moved forward for the kill. The last example is me playing Huskar with Slaughter versus Leshrac and Bloodseeker. Going through the questions again, how can they hurt me? I know that Bloodseeker doesn't do a lot of damage before he gets Rupture at level 6. Leshrac, on the other hand, can potentially land a stun and chase me down with Diabolic Edicts. So how can I avoid that? Well, as long as I stay near my creeps, Diabolic Edict's damage is going to be reduced. Also, if I stay near Slaughter, he can stun Leshrac, allowing us to run away. As a general rule in pub games, you want to rely on yourself more so than your allies. I have nothing against my allies, but I just want to be safe. So I'm going to focus on making sure I have creeps nearby, rather than relying on his stun. I will also have to change to a more passive playstyle once Bloodseeker hits level 6 to avoid getting caught out of position with a Rupture. Once I made my strategy for surviving, let's move on to the last question. How can I hurt them? If I keep throwing burning spears at them, I can easily wear down their regen and eventually push them out. As a bonus, if Slaughter ever lands a stun on either of them, we can chase our targets for a lot of damage. The key is to actively look for situations to hurt them, while putting the focus on survival first. I carefully positioned myself during the early game and waited for an opportunity. Finally, Leshrac stepped out of position and Slaughter landed a stun. We worked together, focused him down, and got the kill. I really hope I have imprinted the three questions in your head by repeating them again and again in 4 different examples. In your next game, give it a try. By consciously answering them, you will develop your own strategy in every lane that you're in. If you end up losing your lane, go back to the questions again so you have better answers for next time. I hope this simple method will improve your games during the laning phase. I want to thank my viewer NoSensitus for asking a great question. I want to set this as an example. I do read your comments and your questions, so if you do have one, post it below. Who knows, I may make a video out of it. Anyways, this is Ninjak signing out, and I'll see you guys next time.